In the scorching heat of a military training ground, where discipline and respect are carved into every soldier's soul, a moment of chaos erupted that would challenge everything the Marines thought they knew about courage, honor, and the true meaning of strength. What started as angry shouts and clenched fists ended in stunned silence when a simple revelation turned enemies into allies and transformed a potential disaster into a lesson that would echo through the halls of military history forever. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on Camp Pendleton. As Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez wiped the sweat from her brow, she had been driving for 3 hours straight delivering classified documents between military installations when her jeep suddenly sputtered to a stop on the dusty road leading to the main training facility. Steam hissed from under the hood, and she knew immediately that the radiator had given up the fight against the brutal California heat. Maria stepped out of the vehicle and assessed her situation. She was still 2 miles from the base, carrying sensitive materials that couldn't be left unattended, and her radio had lost signal in this particular dead zone between the hills. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, but the temperature remained unforgiving. She grabbed her water bottle, secured the documents in her tactical bag, and began the long walk toward the base. As she trudged along the dusty path, Maria could hear the distant sounds of training exercises echoing across the desert landscape. Gunfire crackled in controlled bursts. Drill sergeants barked orders, and the rhythmic pounding of boots on dirt created a familiar symphony that had been the soundtrack to her military career for the past 12 years. She had earned her stripes through dedication, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to excellence that had seen her through 3 deployments and countless challenges. Maria had joined the Marines straight out of high school, driven by a desire to serve her country, and prove that she could excel in any environment. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she had been raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. Military service offered not just purpose but stability and the chance to send money home to help her younger siblings pursue their own dreams. Over the years, she had risen through the ranks, earning respect from superiors and subordinates alike through her tactical expertise, leadership skills, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from facing adversity and emerging stronger. Her current assignment involved coordinating logistics between different training units, a role that required both administrative precision and field experience. The documents in her bag contained training schedules, equipment allocations, and strategic plans for upcoming joint exercises with Allied forces. It was routine work by military standards, but every detail mattered when it came to ensuring that thousands of service members could train safely and effectively. As Maria walked, she noticed a cloud of dust approaching from behind her. A convoy of 3 military trucks was heading in her direction, filled with Marines returning from an extended field exercise. The vehicles slowed as they drew near, and she could see curious faces peering out from the back of the trucks. Most of the Marines looked young, probably fresh out of boot camp and experiencing their first taste of advanced training. The lead truck came to a stop beside her, and a young corporal leaned out from the passenger seat. His uniform was dirty from days in the field, and his face showed the particular combination of exhaustion and adrenaline that comes after completing a challenging mission.
"Ma'am, you need assistance?"
the corporal asked politely. Maria could see the genuine concern in his eyes, and she appreciated the offer. "My vehicle broke down about 2 miles back," Maria replied, gesturing toward the way she had come. "I need to get these documents to the command center, but I can manage the walk if necessary." The corporal turned to confer with someone in the cab of the truck, and Maria heard muffled voices discussing the situation. After a moment, he turned back to her with a smile. "We've got room in the back, ma'am. We're heading to the same destination, and it's no trouble to give you a ride." Maria nodded gratefully and moved toward the rear of the truck. As she approached, several Marines shifted to make space for her among the benches that lined the sides of the vehicle. The truck bed was crowded with gear, weapons, and tired soldiers, but they managed to create a spot where she could sit comfortably. "Thank you," she said as she climbed up into the truck. "I appreciate the help." The Marines around her nodded politely, but Maria could sense a certain tension in the air. Some of the younger soldiers seemed uncertain about how to interact with her, while others appeared openly skeptical. She recognized the look. It was the same expression she had encountered countless times throughout her career. The mixture of curiosity and doubt that some people displayed when they encountered a woman in a military role they weren't expecting. Maria had learned long ago not to take such reactions personally. She understood that many of these young Marines had grown up with limited exposure to women in combat roles, and their attitudes were often shaped more by inexperience than malice. Her approach had always been to demonstrate her competence through actions rather than words, allowing her performance to speak for itself. As the truck resumed its journey toward the base, conversation among the Marines gradually picked up. They discussed the exercise they had just completed, comparing notes on tactics, equipment performance, and the challenges they had faced. Maria listened with interest, occasionally offering insights based on her own experience with similar training scenarios. One of the Marines, a private first class who looked like he couldn't be more than 19 years old, began describing a particularly difficult obstacle course that had been part of their recent assessment. His enthusiasm was infectious as he recounted how his team had worked together to overcome what seemed like impossible challenges. "The rope climb at the end was killer," he said, flexing his arms dramatically. "My hands were so torn up I could barely grip anything, but somehow I made it to the top." Sergeant Williams said it was one of the best times he'd seen from a recruit. Other Marines chimed in with their own stories, and Maria found herself smiling at their energy and camaraderie. Despite the initial tension, the atmosphere in the truck was warming up as the soldiers shared their experiences and achievements. However, not everyone in the truck seemed to appreciate the increasingly relaxed mood. Toward the back of the vehicle, a group of 3 Marines sat in relative silence, occasionally exchanging glances and muttering comments that Maria couldn't quite hear over the engine noise and general conversation. The largest of the 3, a lance corporal with broad shoulders and an aggressive demeanor, finally spoke up loud enough for others to hear. His name tag read Patterson, and something about his posture suggested he was used to being the dominant personality in any group. "So what exactly is your story?" Patterson asked, directing his question toward Maria with a tone that was just barely within the bounds of military courtesy. "You some kind of specialist or something?" Maria met his gaze calmly. "I'm Staff Sergeant with Logistics Coordination," she replied simply. "Currently delivering operational documents between units." Patterson's expression shifted slightly, and Maria could see skepticism written across his features. "Staff Sergeant, huh? That's interesting. You must have some pretty impressive qualifications to reach that rank." There was an undertone in his voice that suggested he doubted her credentials, but Maria had dealt with similar challenges throughout her career. She knew that some soldiers, particularly those who were insecure about their own abilities, sometimes felt threatened by successful women in the military, and expressed that discomfort through subtle or not-so-subtle challenges. 12 years of service," Maria replied evenly. 3 deployments, advanced tactical training, and a track record of successful mission completion. Same qualifications as any other staff sergeant. Patterson exchanged a look with his companions, and Maria could see them whispering among themselves. The other Marines in the truck seemed to sense the growing tension, and conversations began to die down as attention focused on the brewing confrontation. 12 years, Patterson said, his voice carrying a note of mock surprise. "That's impressive. I'm just curious about what kind of action you've actually seen. I mean, logistics coordination sounds pretty safe compared to what some of us have been through." Maria felt a familiar surge of frustration, but she kept her expression neutral. She had learned that responding emotionally to such challenges usually made the situation worse. Instead, she decided to address the underlying issue directly. "Every role in the military serves a vital function," she said calmly. "Logistics coordination involves working in forward positions, often under fire, to ensure that frontline units have the supplies and support they need to complete their missions. I've been in plenty of dangerous situations, but I don't feel the need to prove anything to you or anyone else." Her response seemed to agitate Patterson rather than satisfy him. He leaned forward slightly, and his voice took on a more aggressive edge. "Look, I'm not trying to cause problems here, but I think we all know that women in the military get special treatment. Easier physical standards, protected assignments, promotions based on politics rather than merit. It's not fair to those of us who have to meet the real standards." The truck fell completely silent except for the rumble of the engine and the sound of tires on gravel. Every Marine in the vehicle was now focused on the confrontation, and Maria could see a range of expressions from uncomfortable embarrassment to curious anticipation. Maria took a deep breath, considering her options. She could let the comments slide and avoid escalating the situation, which would be the diplomatically safe choice. Alternatively, she could address Patterson's prejudices head-on, which might lead to a more serious confrontation, but could also serve as a teachable moment for the other Marines who were watching. "Lance Corporal Patterson," she said, using his rank and name to establish the formal nature of the conversation. "I've met every physical and professional standard required for my position. I've never received special treatment, and I've earned every promotion through demonstrated competence and leadership. Your assumptions about my qualifications are incorrect and inappropriate." Patterson's face reddened, and his companion shifted uncomfortably beside him. It was clear that he hadn't expected such a direct response, and he seemed unsure how to proceed without either backing down or escalating the confrontation significantly. "Easy for you to say," he muttered, but with less conviction than before. The tension in the truck was now palpable. Other Marines were looking back and forth between Maria and Patterson, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but unsure how to intervene. The young corporal who had initially offered Maria a ride was glancing nervously toward the front of the truck, probably considering whether he should alert the driver to the brewing conflict. Maria realized that this moment was about more than just defending herself from one ignorant soldier's prejudices. The other Marines in the truck were watching to see how she handled the challenge, and her response would influence their perceptions not just of her, but potentially of other women they might serve alongside in the future. "Lance Corporal," she said, her voice carrying the authority of her rank and experience. "I understand that change can be difficult to accept. When I first joined the Marines, there were people who doubted whether I belonged here. I proved them wrong through hard work, dedication, and results. I've saved lives, completed critical missions, and earned the respect of my fellow Marines through my actions, not through any special consideration." She paused, looking around at the other Marines in the truck before continuing. "Every person in this truck, regardless of gender, race, or background, is here because they've demonstrated the courage and commitment to serve their country. We're all part of the same team, working toward the same goals. When we start questioning each other's qualifications based on assumptions and prejudices, rather than actual performance, we weaken that team." Several Marines nodded in agreement, and Maria could see that her words were resonating with at least some of them. However, Patterson still looked unconvinced, and his expression had hardened into stubborn resistance. "That's a nice speech," he said, his voice now openly hostile, "but talk is cheap. In a real combat situation, I want to know that the person next to me can handle themselves when things get serious. I've got nothing against women personally, but this isn't a game. Lives are on the line." The comment struck a nerve, and Maria felt her carefully maintained composure begin to crack. She had heard variations of the same argument countless times throughout her career, and it never failed to anger her because it dismissed her actual combat experience and the sacrifices she had made in service to her country. Before she could respond, however, the truck hit a particularly large pothole, causing everyone to bounce violently in their seats. The sudden jolt seemed to break some of the tension, and several Marines grabbed onto the sides of the truck to steady themselves. As they settled back into their seats, Maria noticed that Patterson and his two companions were whispering more urgently among themselves. Their body language suggested they were planning something, and she felt a growing sense of unease about where this confrontation was headed. The truck began to slow as they approached the main gate of the training facility. Guard towers were visible in the distance, and Maria could see the familiar sight of Marines manning checkpoints and conducting security procedures. In just a few minutes, they would reach their destination, and this uncomfortable journey would be over. However, as the vehicle came to a stop at a traffic control point about a mile from the main gate, Maria realized that her ordeal was far from finished. The driver called back to inform the passengers that there would be a brief delay while convoy procedures were completed, and that they should remain in the truck. Patterson saw this as an opportunity to continue his harassment. He stood up in the truck bed, using his height advantage to loom over Maria in what was clearly intended as an intimidating gesture. "You know what I think?" he said, his voice now loud enough for everyone to hear clearly. "I think you're all talk and no substance. I think you've been hiding behind paperwork and politics your whole career, and when it comes down to real action, you'd fold like a cheap tent." His two companions snickered at the comment, emboldening Patterson to continue his attack. Other Marines in the truck looked increasingly uncomfortable, but none seemed willing to intervene in what was becoming an increasingly ugly confrontation. "Why don't you prove you're as tough as you claim?" Patterson continued, his voice taking on a taunting quality. "Show us what you're really made of instead of just running your mouth about how qualified you are." Maria stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. She was smaller than Patterson, but her posture radiated the kind of quiet confidence that comes from years of facing down bullies and emerging victorious. "Lance Corporal," she said, her voice carrying a dangerous edge, "you're walking a very thin line here. I suggest you reconsider your approach before this situation gets out of hand." Instead of backing down, Patterson seemed to interpret her warning as a challenge. He stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that was clearly intended to provoke a reaction. "Or what?" he sneered. "You going to file a complaint? Run crying to your superior officers about how the mean Marines were picking on you? That's exactly the kind of special treatment I'm talking about." The situation had now reached a critical point. Maria could feel the attention of every Marine in the truck focused on her, waiting to see how she would respond to Patterson's escalating aggression. She knew that her next move would have consequences that extended far beyond this single confrontation. What Patterson and the other Marines didn't know was that Maria Rodriguez had a history that none of them could have imagined. Her 12 years of service included not just routine deployments, but some of the most dangerous and classified missions that the Marine Corps had undertaken in recent years. The documents in her tactical bag weren't just administrative paperwork, they were operational plans that she had personally helped develop based on intelligence she had gathered in hostile territory. But those were secrets that couldn't be revealed in a casual confrontation with the ignorant Lance Corporal. Maria would have to find another way to handle this situation, one that would preserve operational security while also addressing the challenge to her authority and competence. As the tension in the truck reached its peak, none of the Marines present could have anticipated the shocking revelation that was about to transform their understanding of exactly who they were dealing with. The standoff between Maria and Patterson stretched on for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only seconds. The other Marines in the truck bed watched with a mixture of fascination and horror as the confrontation escalated beyond anything they had expected. When they offered a stranded soldier a simple ride back to base, Maria could see the calculation in Patterson's eyes as he weighed his options. He had committed himself to this course of action in front of his peers, and backing down now would be seen as weakness. She recognized the type: young, aggressive, insecure about his own abilities, and needing to prove his dominance through intimidation. She had encountered similar personalities throughout her career, and she knew that reasoning with him was becoming increasingly unlikely. "You know what your problem is?" Patterson continued, his voice growing louder and more belligerent. "You think that uniform gives you respect you haven't earned. You think people should just accept your authority because of some rank on your collar, but real Marines earn their respect through action, not politics." Several of the other Marines shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing that Patterson was crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. Military discipline and chain of command weren't just abstract concepts. They were the foundation that allowed diverse groups of people to function effectively under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. The young corporal who had initially offered Maria a ride finally found his courage. "Hey, Patterson, maybe you should dial it back a little. She's a staff sergeant, man. Show some respect." Patterson whirled around to face the corporal, his anger now expanding to include anyone who dared to question his behavior. Respect? For what? For hiding behind a desk while real Marines do the fighting? For getting promoted because the brass needs to meet their diversity quotas? His words hit Maria like physical blows, not because they hurt her personally, but because she knew the damage such attitudes could do to unit cohesion and the military's ability to effectively integrate women into combat roles. Every time someone like Patterson voiced these prejudices, it made the job harder for every woman who came after. But Maria had learned something important during her years of service. Sometimes the best way to deal with a bully was to give them exactly what they thought they wanted. If Patterson wanted a demonstration of her capabilities, perhaps it was time to provide one. "Lance Corporal Patterson," she said, her voice now carrying the unmistakable tone of command authority. "You seem to have some doubts about my qualifications and combat readiness. Would you like me to address those concerns directly?" Something in her tone made Patterson hesitate for the first time since the confrontation began. There was a quality to her voice that suggested confidence backed by real experience, not just bluster or bravado. But he had gone too far to retreat now, especially with his companions watching and waiting to see if he would follow through on his aggressive posturing. "Yeah? Actually, I would," Patterson replied, though some of the certainty had gone out of his voice. "I think everyone here would like to see what you're actually capable of beyond giving speeches about teamwork." Maria nodded slowly, as if considering his challenge seriously. "Very well. When we reach the base, if you're genuinely interested in testing my combat readiness, I'm willing to accommodate that request. But understand that once we start down that path, there's no backing out because you realize you've made a mistake." The other Marines in the truck exchanged glances, clearly sensing that something significant was about to happen. The atmosphere had shifted from uncomfortable tension to something more serious, as if a line had been crossed from which there would be no easy return. Patterson seemed to realize that Maria had just called his bluff, but he was too committed to his aggressive stance to back down gracefully. "Fine," he said, trying to inject confidence into his voice. "Let's see what you've got, Staff Sergeant." The truck resumed its journey toward the main gate, but the mood had changed completely. Where before there had been the easy camaraderie of soldiers sharing war stories and complaints about training, now there was the heavy anticipation that comes before a significant confrontation. Marines who had been chattering about their recent exercises now sat in silence, processing what they had witnessed and wondering what would happen next. Maria used the remaining travel time to study Patterson and his two companions more carefully. She noticed details that her initial assessment had missed. The way Patterson carried himself suggested some hand-to-hand combat training, probably the standard martial arts instruction that all Marines received. His build indicated strength and physical fitness, but also the kind of bulk that could slow reaction times. His companions seemed to defer to his leadership, which suggested either genuine respect or simple intimidation. More importantly, Maria observed the other Marines in the truck. These were the real audience for whatever was about to happen. Their reactions and the lessons they took from this confrontation would influence their attitudes toward women in the military for years to come. Some seemed sympathetic to her position, while others appeared curious about whether she could actually back up her confident words with action. The truck finally rolled through the main gate after completing security procedures, and Maria could see the familiar layout of the training facility spread out before them. Barracks, administrative buildings, training areas, and support facilities stretched across several square miles of carefully organized military infrastructure. Somewhere in that complex was the command center where she needed to deliver her documents, but that routine task now seemed almost secondary to the challenge that Patterson had issued. As the convoy came to a stop near a motor pool facility, Marines began gathering their gear and preparing to disembark. The normal sounds of soldiers ending a long journey, complaints about sore backs, discussions of shower schedules, and plans for evening meals were notably absent. Instead, there was the kind of quiet tension that precedes significant events. Patterson was among the first to jump down from the truck, and he immediately turned to face Maria as she climbed down with her tactical bag. His two companions flanked him, clearly expecting some kind of confrontation to occur immediately. "So," Patterson said, his voice carrying across the motor pool area, "are we going to do this, or was all that tough talk just for show?" Other Marines from the convoy had gathered around, creating an impromptu audience for whatever was about to happen. Word seemed to be spreading quickly through the area, as additional personnel began emerging from nearby buildings to see what was causing the commotion. Maria set her tactical bag down carefully, ensuring that the classified documents remained secure while she addressed Patterson's challenge. She looked around at the growing crowd of Marines, recognizing that this moment had become about much more than one ignorant soldier's prejudices. "Lance Corporal," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the assembly. "Before we proceed, I want to make sure you understand exactly what you're asking for. You've questioned my combat readiness, my qualifications, and my right to wear this uniform. You've suggested that I've received special treatment and that I would be a liability in a combat situation. Is that an accurate summary of your position?" Patterson glanced around at the crowd, clearly aware that he was now performing for a much larger audience than he had anticipated. The attention seemed to embolden him rather than make him more cautious. "That's right," he said loudly. "I don't think you belong here, and I don't think you've earned the respect that rank is supposed to command. If you want to prove me wrong, then let's see what you've got." A murmur ran through the crowd of Marines. Some seemed shocked by Patterson's open insubordination, while others appeared curious about how Maria would respond to such a direct challenge. The situation had clearly moved beyond anything that could be resolved through normal disciplinary channels. Maria nodded as if Patterson's response was exactly what she had expected. "I see. And what exactly would you consider adequate proof of my combat readiness? What kind of demonstration would satisfy your doubts?" Patterson seemed momentarily uncertain, as if he hadn't thought through the specifics of his challenge beyond the general desire to humiliate her. After a moment, he gestured toward a nearby training area that included various obstacle course elements and combat simulation equipment. "Hand-to-hand combat," he said finally. "Real fighting, not some demonstration or choreographed routine. If you're as qualified as you claim, you should be able to handle yourself in a real confrontation." The crowd of Marines fell silent. Everyone present understood the implications of what Patterson was proposing. Hand-to-hand combat between service members wasn't just discouraged, it was potentially a court-martial offense depending on the circumstances. But the challenge had been issued publicly, and the dynamics of military culture made it difficult for either party to back down without losing face. Maria appeared to consider the proposal seriously, though she was actually calculating the best way to handle a situation that had spiraled beyond reasonable bounds. She could report Patterson's insubordination through proper channels, which would result in disciplinary action but might also reinforce stereotypes about women running to authority figures when challenged. Alternatively, she could accept his challenge and demonstrate her capabilities directly, which carried its own risks but might have a more lasting impact on attitudes throughout the unit. "Very well," Maria said finally. If a demonstration of hand-to-hand combat skills is what it takes to resolve your concerns about my qualifications, then I'm willing to provide one. But I want witnesses to confirm that this is taking place at your specific request and insistence." Several Marines in the crowd nodded their agreement, clearly understanding that they were being asked to serve as official witnesses to whatever was about to occur. The young corporal who had offered Maria a ride stepped forward. "Staff Sergeant, Lance Corporal Patterson specifically challenged your combat readiness and requested this demonstration despite being given multiple opportunities to withdraw his challenge," he said formally. Patterson's face reddened at the implication that he had been offered an easy way out, but he nodded his confirmation. "That's right. I requested this, and I'm ready to follow through." Maria removed her tactical bag and handed it to the corporal for safekeeping. She then began removing excess equipment, her cover, her utility belt, and other items that might interfere with movement during physical combat. As she did so, she spoke to the assembled Marines. "I want everyone here to understand something important," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the group. "What's about to happen isn't about proving that women are better fighters than men or that gender doesn't matter in combat situations. Physical strength and combat skills are distributed across individuals regardless of gender, and every Marine's value to the Corps depends on their specific abilities and contributions." She paused to ensure that her words were being absorbed before continuing. "What this is about is earning the right to be judged based on individual merit rather than assumptions and prejudices. Lance Corporal Patterson has made it clear that he doesn't believe I've earned my rank or my place in the Marines. He's entitled to his opinion, but he's not entitled to express that opinion through insubordination and disrespect." Patterson seemed to realize that Maria was using this moment for more than just preparation for physical combat. She was delivering a lesson to every Marine present about respect, professionalism, and the proper way to address concerns about fellow service members. His discomfort was visible, but he had committed himself to this course of action. "Are you done talking?" he asked, trying to regain control of the situation. "Because I'm ready to settle this right now." Maria finished her preparations and moved to the center of a clear area that the crowd had formed around them. The space was adequate for hand-to-hand combat, with enough room for movement, but clear boundaries to prevent the confrontation from expanding beyond manageable limits. "I'm ready when you are, Lance Corporal," she said calmly. Patterson stepped into the makeshift ring, and Maria could see that he was trying to psych himself up for the confrontation. He was bigger and probably stronger than she was, and he clearly expected those advantages to be decisive. What he didn't know was that Maria's combat training extended far beyond the standard hand-to-hand instruction that all Marines received. During her second deployment, Maria had been selected for specialized training in close-quarters combat and personal protection techniques. The instruction had been intense and comprehensive, covering not just basic fighting skills but advanced techniques for neutralizing larger, stronger opponents. She had continued that training throughout her career, recognizing that maintaining peak physical and combat readiness was essential for someone in her position. More importantly, Maria had actual combat experience that went far beyond training exercises. During her third deployment, she had been involved in several situations where hand-to-hand combat skills had been the difference between life and death. She had faced opponents who were fighting for their lives, not just trying to prove a point in front of their peers. Patterson began circling her, his movements telegraphing his intention to use his size and reach advantages to overwhelm her quickly. Maria remained stationary, her stance relaxed but ready, her eyes tracking his movement patterns and looking for tells that would indicate his attack strategy. "Last chance to back out," Patterson said, though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried earlier. Maria smiled, and for the first time since the confrontation began, she looked genuinely relaxed. "Lance Corporal, I appreciate the offer, but I think we've moved beyond the point where backing down is an option for either of us." Patterson launched his attack without warning, moving forward with surprising speed for someone of his size. He led with a straight punch aimed at Maria's face, clearly intending to end the confrontation quickly with a knockout blow. Maria's response was so fast that several Marines in the crowd missed it entirely. She sidestepped Patterson's punch, grabbed his extended arm, and used his own momentum to throw him off balance. Before he could recover, she had moved behind him and applied a chokehold that immediately put pressure on his carotid arteries. Patterson struggled violently, his superior strength allowing him to break free from the hold, but not before Maria had demonstrated her ability to neutralize his initial attack and gain a dominant position. The brief exchange had lasted less than 10 seconds, but it had shown every Marine present that Maria possessed real combat skills, not just theoretical knowledge. "Impressive," Patterson admitted grudgingly as he turned to face her again. but I'm just getting started. His second attack was more cautious, recognizing that Maria was a more formidable opponent than he had initially assumed. He feinted with his left hand while preparing to grab her with his right, hoping to use his size advantage to control the fight through grappling rather than striking. Maria recognized the strategy and countered it by staying mobile, using her speed and agility to avoid being caught in a prolonged grappling match where Patterson's strength would be most effective. She landed several quick strikes to his ribs and arms, not attempting to cause serious damage but demonstrating her ability to hit him at will while avoiding his attempts to grab her. The crowd of Marines watched in fascination as the confrontation continued. What had started as an ugly display of prejudice and insubordination was becoming a masterclass in combat techniques and tactical thinking. Several of the observers began offering quiet commentary on the techniques they were witnessing, clearly impressed by the skill level being demonstrated. Patterson was becoming increasingly frustrated as his advantages in size and strength failed to translate into dominance in the fight. Maria's superior training and experience were becoming evident with each exchange, and his initial confidence was giving way to the realization that he had badly underestimated his opponent. "How is she doing that?" one Marine whispered to another. "Advanced combat training," came the reply. "She knows what she's doing." The exchange continued for several more minutes, with Patterson becoming more desperate in his attacks as Maria systematically dismantled his offensive capabilities. She avoided his most dangerous strikes while landing precise counterattacks that gradually wore down his stamina and confidence. Finally, Patterson made a critical mistake. Frustrated by his inability to land effective strikes, he committed fully to a tackle attempt, hoping to bring Maria down and use his weight advantage on the ground. Maria read the attack perfectly, sidestepped at the last moment, and used Patterson's momentum to send him face first into the dirt. Before Patterson could recover, Maria had moved into a dominant position and applied a submission hold that made it impossible for him to continue fighting without risking serious injury. The confrontation was effectively over. "Do you yield?" Maria asked, her voice calm and professional despite the physical exertion of the fight. Patterson struggled briefly, but the hold was expertly applied and escape was impossible. "I yield," he said through gritted teeth. Maria immediately released the hold and stepped back, offering Patterson a hand up from the ground. The gesture surprised him, and for a moment he seemed uncertain how to respond to the offer of assistance from someone he had been trying to defeat moments earlier. "Good fight," Maria said as Patterson reluctantly accepted her help getting to his feet. "You've got solid basic training, but you need to work on reading your opponent's movements and controlling your emotions during combat." The crowd of Marines burst into spontaneous applause, clearly impressed by what they had witnessed. The confrontation had lasted long enough to demonstrate Maria's superior skills, but it ended without serious injury to either participant. Patterson stood in the circle of Marines, dirt-coating his uniform in his pride thoroughly bruised. The fight had lasted longer than anyone expected, but the outcome had been decisive. Maria Rodriguez had systematically dismantled every advantage he thought he possessed, demonstrating a level of combat expertise that left no doubt about her qualifications as a Marine. But as impressive as her fighting skills had been, it was her demeanor during and after the confrontation that truly caught the attention of the assembled Marines. She had remained calm and professional throughout the entire ordeal, treating Patterson with respect even as she dominated him physically. There had been no taunting, no unnecessary aggression, and no attempt to humiliate him beyond what was necessary to resolve the challenge he had issued. "Lance Corporal," Maria said, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent crowd, "I hope this demonstration has addressed your concerns about my combat readiness, but I want you to understand something important about what just happened here." Patterson was still breathing heavily from the exertion of the fight, but he nodded for her to continue. His two companions, who had been eagerly anticipating his victory, now looked thoroughly chastened by what they had witnessed. "Fighting skills are just one component of what makes someone an effective Marine," Maria continued. "Leadership, tactical thinking, the ability to work as part of a team, making sound decisions under pressure. These qualities are what really determine someone's value to the core. Physical combat abilities matter, but they're meaningless without the character and judgment to use them appropriately." She gestured toward the crowd of Marines who had gathered to watch the confrontation. "Every person here has demonstrated the courage to serve their country, and every person here deserves respect based on their individual contributions, not assumptions based on their gender, race, or background. When we start dividing ourselves into categories of who belongs and who doesn't, we weaken the entire organization." Several Marines in the crowd nodded their agreement, clearly moved by her words. The lesson was being absorbed not just by Patterson but by everyone present who would carry the memory of this confrontation with them throughout their military careers. Patterson finally found his voice. "Staff Sergeant, I owe you an apology. I was wrong to question your qualifications, and I was completely out of line with my behavior in the truck. You've proven that you're more than capable of holding your own in any situation." Maria nodded acknowledgement of his apology, but her expression remained serious. "I appreciate that, Lance Corporal, but I want you to understand that I didn't prove anything today that I haven't been proving every day for the past 12 years. My combat readiness, my leadership abilities, and my right to wear this uniform have been demonstrated through consistent performance and dedication, not through a single fight in a motor pool." The crowd began to disperse as Marines returned to their regular duties, but many lingered to speak with Maria or to continue discussing what they had witnessed. The young corporal who had initially offered her a ride approached with her tactical bag. "Staff Sergeant, that was incredible," he said with genuine admiration. "I've never seen anything like that. Where did you learn to fight like that?" Maria accepted her bag and began checking its contents to ensure that the classified documents were still secure. "Advanced training during my second deployment," she replied. "The Marine Corps invests in specialized instruction for personnel in certain roles. But remember, what you saw today was the result of years of training and real-world experience, not something that happens overnight." As she prepared to continue her journey to the command center to deliver her documents, Maria noticed that Patterson was still standing nearby, apparently wrestling with something he wanted to say. She decided to give him the opportunity to speak privately, away from the crowd that was still processing what they had witnessed. "Lance Corporal," she said, approaching him, "is there something else you wanted to discuss?" Patterson looked uncomfortable, but he seemed determined to say what was on his mind. "Staff Sergeant, I need you to know that my behavior today doesn't represent how I was raised or what I actually believe about women in the military. I was trying to impress my buddies, and I let my mouth run ahead of my brain. It was inexcusable." Maria studied his face, looking for signs of sincerity versus simple embarrassment at being defeated publicly. What she saw was genuine remorse and a dawning realization of how his attitudes had been shaped by ignorance rather than actual experience. "I appreciate your honesty," she said, "but I'm curious about something. You mentioned that you were trying to impress your friends. What exactly did you think would impress them about disrespecting a superior officer and questioning her qualifications based on her gender?" Patterson shifted uncomfortably under her direct gaze. I guess I thought it would make me look tough, like I wasn't afraid to speak truth to power or something. Some of the guys in my unit have been talking about how standards are getting lowered to accommodate women, and I thought I was standing up for maintaining military excellence." "And now?" Maria asked. "Now I realized that I was just repeating ignorant opinions without any actual knowledge to back them up," Patterson admitted. "You're obviously more qualified than I am, and probably more qualified than most Marines I know. I let prejudice and peer pressure turn me into someone I don't want to be." Maria nodded, recognizing the sincerity in his admission.